Hello fellow gamers, welcome to Azreality Gaming. My name is Dustin, and today we're going to be talking about my memories of playing EverQuest back in the day of the early 90s, all the different expansions that I played through on the EverQuest server. I recently completed my big box collection of these games, and I want to share with you my memories. I already said memories, but we're getting into it anyways. Here we go. The year was 1999, March to be exact, when EverQuest was first released by Sony Online Entertainment with a combination of Variant Studios. At that time, I was just barely kind of getting into the game. I think I was about 2 weeks after the game was originally released when I first started playing. And my memories of that time are, very vague. I was 23 at the time, so this is over 20 years ago. The first character I created, I wanted to make sure to create a dark, evil kind of a character. So, of course, I picked the Dark Elves because they're the coolest. They had the Ultra Vision, which was really nice. And then I, picked the most evilest class I could possibly pick, which was the Necromancer. I love the Necromancer. Today is my favorite class of all. I didn't really play any other classes. I just poured all my energy and time into that one class. I remember picking, starting in Nekatul's Forest, which was just dark, gloomy, really hard to figure out where things were. It seemed like the zone was like a whole game. The whole zone was just one huge game. It just went on forever. There was like so much to traverse and so much to do in that one zone from levels 1 to 10. I think I remember levels 1 to 10 taking me like, I think 2 or 3 weeks. It was grueling. It was hard. It was not easy. The experience gain was super duper slow. If you died, you lost XP. You lost gear. It was tough. My character's name at the time I think was Catalia. Yeah, that was Catalia. I just picked her out of a book that I was reading at the time. I think was reading Magician by Raymond E. Feast. Katala was one of the characters, and I just made a play on words with Catalia. So if anybody out there from EverQuest servers remember a necromancer called Catalia, that is me. Some of my greatest memories from the first part of EverQuest was the long, arduous camps that you had to do for certain gear. The Journeyman Boots comes to mind in particular that I actually did the camp before they made it a quest. I remember starting the camp around 8 o'clock p.m., and I didn't get done. I actually get my Journeyman Boots until about 5 a.m. that next night, that morning. It was kind of one of those things where you join the group, you were like, okay, you join the group, you're number 5 on the list. Everybody else before you gets priority. So, and then as people get their boots, they bump out and add new people to the group. So, and it was, I think the spawn rate was like once every 15 or so minutes on the character that dropped the particular boots. So it was long and hard, and it wasn't guaranteed every single time, obviously. I think it was about 1 per 2 to 3 hour drop is what it ended up being. Later that morning, I do remember that we had several drop kind of almost in a row, which was great. And that's where I ended up getting mine real late that evening or that early morning. Super excited to be able to get that thing because it allows you to run a lot faster in the game, which was great. A little clickable item that clickables became a really important part of EverQuest, of course. As a class that does kiting and dotting, you really want to be able to have faster run speed, and I wasn't really a big fan of reaching out to druids and things like that, trying to get a Spear of the Wolf sows, things like that. So it was nice to be able to have my own sustainable form of run speed. I just remember that being just the most epic drudging game experience that I've ever had in my life. After that, I've had long camps before in the game, obviously, but that one took the cake for sure. The one thing that I remember being really difficult with EverQuest in the early days was just the unknown parts of the game. Like just the traversing of zones that seemed like forever to get across these zones. The added, fear of getting trained by different monsters in the zone that you didn't expect to be on top of you. Guards that would pop out of nowhere and kill you in one whack. And when you run across, 4 or 5 zones, that could be almost, 30 minutes worth of your time just to run to go to another area. It was dark in some of the zones. They had like different lighting and things like that, so it was really hard to see. And if you didn't have like a character that had a lighting option, you couldn't actually see. Luckily, I was a dark elf, so I had some sort of like ultra vision, which made it a little easier. But nonetheless, it was just a difficult game to be able to traverse, figure out where things were. So back in those days, we didn't know what we were doing, right? We didn't have the internet. We barely had the internet, right? There was no Google back in those days. The minimum requirements was like a Pentium 2 and a 28.8K baud modem that we had to use a dial-up connection to be able to access these servers. So our connections were shit, right? Constantly disconnected, got bumped off the game. The next expansion was Runes of Canarch, which came out in early 2000s. I remember this being really hyped and really exciting. This was the first time that they increased the level cap from 50 to 60. There was one new race added to it, which was the Ixars, which were kind of a race of lizard people, which was pretty cool. And a whole city, associated with that. They were more of an evil class, so it was kind of nice because as a necromancer, I could actually get in there and access that. I do remember this was also the point where they created epic weapons, which was the first time that you had to have a whole group or a guild of people being able to work together in conjunction to be able to kill certain raid bosses, dragons, things like that, to be able to get drops, which weren't guaranteed, to be able to have a chance at combining all these crazy parts in this long, arduous, drawn-out quest, hence the EverQuest, to get your super powerful, uber, mega, epic weapon. Some epic weapons were better than others, obviously, depending upon your class. For the Necromancer, I remember it being it looked like a duck on the end of a stick, which was kind of funny. It was like the duck stick. But it gave an instant dot that slowed the monsters from running fast. So it did a little damage, and it slowed them down. So as you're kiting, this was crucial. This was one of those things that you had to have. And even later on in my character's life, it was still a weapon that I kept because it was a nice clickable that you could use on the fly. Of course, there was a lot of great, amazing new additions to the game, like big monstrous dragons in Vishan Peak, the sprawling dungeon of Old Seblis, where you had different undead froglocks, and all the uber weapons were all the uber gear, I should say, was dropped pretty much in Old Seblis. And just all the weird, obscure quests that you could do in this game at that point in time. There was so much stuff to do. The zones were huge. The dragons would eat you in just one hit. It was just a wonderful experience this game was at that point in time. One of the memories I remember of camping was trying to get a Circlet of Shadows, which at that point in time was an instant click invisibility item that Necromancers and Shadow Knights could wear or use. You could wear it or you could use it from your inventory, which of course for a Necromancer that's huge. You're a hated race. Being able to instantly invisible yourself from most things that would want to kill you in one hit was awesome. Later on they changed it, they nerfed it, and they made it to where it was like a 2 or 3 second casting time or something like that, which is still valuable, but to be able to just instant click it on the run for the original version, man, that was the best item that I had forever, for a long time. I still have it on my character today, and it's one of the items that I remember camping and loving to get. I did solo camp that, which was kind of an adventurous time for me. I wasn't really good at this game, I think, in the beginning days, even through most of the expansions. I was kind of just an average player, so being able to pull off a big, run into a dungeon deep into it when I was at the level where most of the mobs would kill me anyways, and set up camp inside the spot, split the spawn, and be able to camp it for several hours and get this job myself, solo, was a big accomplishment for me, and I remember learning a lot about how to solo camps at that point in time, which as a Necromancer is a crucial part of your gaming experience, and using it much later on to get gear for yourself and to be able to get more levels. The next expansion to come out was The Scars of Elias, which came out later that year, actually in December 5th, 2000, so we had 2 expansions in 1 year, which was quite a push for any game company to be able to do. I do remember liking this one a lot. This was probably my second favorite expansion out of all of them. This was a lot of time that I spent, working with the dwarves, Coldane dwarves, to be able to raise reputation. The giants and then the dragons were also included in that. Some of my good memories of raiding with the Crimson Eternity at the time was playing in the Kael Drakal, I think it was, the city of the big giants, killing the Avatar of War and then the king in that of that area. These took massive amounts of guild effort, massive amounts of level, gear, combination, working tight together to be able to defeat these different monsters. Temple of Vishan, I think, was another one where all the dragons were. We cleared that as well. But this was a game that required massive amounts of coordination in order to complete the objectives to be able to kill the particular bosses. The raid mechanics weren't necessarily difficult. What was difficult is that we didn't have any chat options. This was pure typing only, right? This was, type in game. That was all you had. You had macros you could set up to where you could spam different things, like if I'm trying to do a complete heal chain to be able to, heal, keep our tanks alive. Back in those days, clerics, healers had this thing called complete heal, which healed a character pretty much from whatever they were to full. Well, these monsters that we fought back in those days in raids were hit so hard that they would basically, take off almost 90% of a character's life. So you had to set up these, what we call complete heal chains, where one character would go, I'm healing this person now for a complete heal, and then count 2 seconds, and the next person would have to do another one. And so you'd have this constant 2 seconds after that one, 2 seconds after the next one. You'd have 6 or so healers constantly rotating through these macros and casting the spell at the same time in order to keep up your tanks and keep, the raid going. Of course, you have mana for clerics, and so you had to, manage your mana versus, how long you could actually keep fighting. The game was intense back in those days. Raiding was difficult. This was, and still today, was the hardest period of time for for people to play a game and to be able to do a raid in a coordinated fashion. No other game has done that since. WoW, while has some very difficult raids out there, especially in the mythical difficulty levels, never touched this. Never, not even close. The difficulty of this game was by far the hardest. And combine that with being on dial-up connections, having to talk through, use your strategies, just figure out the stuff on your own. There wasn't, again, much on the internet about this kind of stuff. Back in those days, I think we had Alakazam, Mob Hunters, and a few other sites, Stratex sites, I think it was. They gave us some hints, but a lot of guilds back in those days, we fought over these different mobs to be able to fight and kill. There was a lot of fierce competition between guilds on all servers. These weren't instance mobs. These were mobs that were only spawned once a week. And so the first person that got there, the first group that got there, got claimed. And so I remember waking up sometimes really early in the morning, like 6 a.m., 5 a.m. For me, that was early as a young 20-year-old, to be getting up and logging onto a game to be able to try to camp out and be ready for when the monsters respawned. And so we would do that, and we would, we'd fight with other guilds. The guilds would come in and train us with a bunch of other mobs and try to take over. There was a lot of, dick guilds out there that did things like that. But it's still, looking back on it, even though it was frustrating, a lot of fun memories about it still nonetheless. Just the challenge to be able to get to these monsters, to be able to kill them, to coordinate, was extreme. And it's something that I remember being very proud of every time we did kill a particular monster that was exceedingly difficult. You spend weeks and weeks wiping on them, just like you would in newer expansions or newer games like World of Warcraft. But these ones were much more. When you killed the monster and you defeated them and you got the gear, there was so much more excitement around it than it was anything else since then. Anyone that played Scars of Elis back in that day also remembers the Sleeper's Tomb, which was a kind of a last. What do you want to call it? A last level, last dungeon that was kind of a last raid instance of the game. You had to complete all the other stuff before you could even get access to it. There was a big keying issue around trying to get the keys to be able to enter the zone. Once you got into it, though, this was where the best gear in the game came from. And you could kill different sleeper guardians, I think is what they were, in order to get this gear. But if you happen to kill all 4 guardians, that would unlock and release the sleeper, which is this big mithril-looking dragon that would just terrorize all the different zones in the game and kill everybody in the zone in one hit. It just was like one of those things, like the dragon pops in, does a message in the chat, and everybody dies. If anybody remembers Deathwing in World of Warcraft, very similar to that, just laid waste to everything in the zone. That was probably inspired by the sleeper. The problem with the sleeper, though, is once that sleeper was awoken, all that gear that the original guardians dropped would never respawn again, so you can never get them again. So there were a lot of competition, a lot of fighting over who's going to wake the sleeper up. Everybody tried to say, don't wake the sleeper up, we want to make sure we get enough gear for everybody. But again, there was a lot of competition. So once the big guild at that time, which I think was probably Midnight Fury or Decor or something like that on Rulsimar, once they got all the different gear for all the different characters, they don't want to share. They don't want competition. So they waxed all the different 4 guardians, spawned the sleeper, and forced everybody never to be able to have that opportunity for that gear again. Kind of a dick move, but it's a way of, curbing your competition, which was a big thing back in those days. The next expansion was the Shadows of Lukeland, Lucin, whatever you want to call it. There's many different ways of pronouncing it. I'm not even sure what the right one is. I think it's called Lukeland. Was released on December 4th, 2001, so about a year later from Scars of Elis, so we had a whole year to be able to play that game, which honestly we needed because the Scars of Elis was so massive to be able to catch up and be able to get through all the different experiences of that. Anyway, Shadow of Lukeland was basically a moon that everybody went to and got to experience. They introduced, I think, beast lords and some sort of cat race. They had these snake-looking people called the Shishars. I remember as a necromancer, I was particularly good at kiting those and getting lots of experience off of those. There were 2 main kind of like raid instances or bosses. There was the Lord Inquisitor Saru, which you had to get a bunch of different rep, if I recall, killing a bunch of things. And there was a huge keying issue as well. Had to get a bunch of different small components, combine them, and do all these quests to be able to get a key, to be able to access this zone. This was also the first expansion that they added in mounts, which was pretty cool. You could actually have a mount run a lot faster, and you could also still meditate while being on a mount, which was a huge advantage. So you didn't actually have to sit there, regain your mana sitting down. You could be mobile while still meditating. The next expansion was The Plains of Power, which was released on October 29th, 2002. So again, almost a year later from the original one. This was by far my favorite expansion. This is where I got to be really good at the game, I would say. Became more of a hardcore raider of the guild. One of the nice things about this game is it gave us a kind of a hub called the Plane of Knowledge, which had all the different shops you could ever want, all the different quests right in one area. It was just a central hub place that you could go to, everybody would be at. I remember it being a lot of fun experience being able to go through some of these quests. This one was all about fighting gods, right? So these are the planes of power. The main big baddies of the particular expansion was these 4 kind of elemental gods. Finrin Ro, which was the kind of the avatar of fire. The Wrath Council, which was the elemental of earth. Kornov, which was I believe it was water, and Zigany, or I don't know how to pronounce it, the air. You had to be able to get access to all these different zones by doing other zones, so everything was kind of like a keyed zone. So you'd start in other zones to be able to get access by collecting different runes and different things for quests to be able to unlock, to be able to even have access to some of these later zones. But the whole point was, once you killed all 4 of those gods, and at least for those 4 zones, you got enough people flagged that you could go into what we call the Plane of Time. Plane of Time was kind of this uber in dungeon for the game, similar to maybe like the Sleeper's Tomb of the previous expansions. Massively crazy strong bosses in there. Actually, what they did is they reintroduced the same monsters again, the same bosses from those from previous dungeons that you were in or previous raids, and made them even stronger with new mechanics. Even the trash would just wipe you out in no time at all with a whole group of people. I remember the Wrath Council being the most difficult one of all to be able to complete. It was basically 8 uber bosses, all in one area that you had to split. They couldn't be killed next to each other, but you had to kill them all at the same time. And you had to kind of whittle them down to get to like 10% health or 5% health, and then move on to the next ones. So basically you had to have 8 off tanks, more or less. You had enchanters that could mesmerize or keep them kind of locked down so they didn't attack or didn't do anything. But anytime like one of the enchanters had their spell resisted, that's an instant wipe. Right? Anytime one of the tanks that was off-tanking one of the ones that couldn't be mezzed got killed or whatever it was, or the healer couldn't get to them, instant wipe. And this carried on for a long time. This was like an hour-long battle. Like you had to kill one, go get them to like 5%, move on to the next, move on to the next. And it was, honestly, I think there was a lot of luck just involved with that. Because again, one resist, one misspell, one fizzle, and your whole raid wipes. Or starts completely over because they heal each other, etc. It was definitely the most difficult. I think we only did it twice because we had to, you can only get so many flags in one instance, but we got most of our guild flagged in 2 runs, and we never went back again because it's such a pain in the ass raid to be able to try to do. The intricacies of that was just astronomical, and honestly, no other games since then have I played that has been that difficult to be able to complete. Near the end of the expansion, after we killed the boss in the Plane of Time, I remember being completely wiped, like completely burnt out. Just have spent tons and tons of time in this game. Early mornings, long camping hours. It was a full-time job just to be able to play this game. Then I burnt out a little bit, and I took some time off, if I remember right. Other expansions came out after that I still played, but I think this was kind of that pinnacle moment for me, was this particular expansion. I would think I was a lead for one of the necromancer groups within the guild, Affliction. And it just took its toll on me. I remember being kind of an asshole to people at that point in time. I was rude, I was obnoxious, I wasn't very friendly, I was kind of opinionated and arrogant. And looking back on it kind of, makes me cringe a little bit, to be honest. I'm a much nicer player today, obviously, than I was back in those days. But for some reason, the competition got the best of me, and it turned me into kind of a jerk, to be honest. So anyways, I'm glad I took my time off and got out of that experience after this. And the next expansions I came in as more of a casual player, which made, I think, the experience in the long run probably better for me. The next expansion that came out was kind of an interesting period of time. It came out in February 25th, 2003, and it was called The Legacy of Yakesha. It was an expansion where they introduced the frog lock looking guys, the frogs, you could play as a character class. A lot of fun characters to play, or races to play. But one of the interesting parts of this is the first time they did, it was a first download only. So it came out of their Sony Online store, so to speak, where you had to download it in order to get access to the game. But again, back in those times, we still had dial-up modems for the most part. Maybe an ISP had, what do you call it, a cable connection or something like that. But generally speaking, took a long time, and a lot of people didn't have access or the bandwidth to be able to download the particular game. So due to that overwhelming demand, a limited number of the CDs were made available to retailers after the project release date. Hence why this particular physical release of this is really rare and really hard to find. This was the last piece that it took me to be able to get. I was very excited to be able to finally complete my full collection, hence why I'm doing this video now, just to kind of share my memories of the experience. This was kind of a smaller expansion. It didn't really add a lot that I remember. I didn't actually play a frog lock, to be honest. Again, I just stuck with my main character, was the Necromancer. I do remember they added armor slot called Charms, and also Dyeable Armor was also part of this. There was no big raid bosses in this. It was just kind of more of like a smaller expansion to add a few more zones, different ways to level, and added some quality of life improvements to the game. Next up, we have The Lost Dungeons of Norath, which released September 9th, 2003. Again, another real kind of a smaller expansion set. This is where they first introduced instanced dungeons that you could use to be able to gather different loots and not have to fight other players for the different camps and things like that. I do remember this was the time where you could get your gear augmented, so you could upgrade your armor and things like that. You were to complete these different dungeons and instances and be able to gain, I think they were called adventure points or something like that, that you could use to then be able to buy different items and spells and augments for your gear at the Wayfarer camp. This was also the first time, if I recall, that Sony introduced the in-game items that you could get only by buying the physical copies of the game. So kind of an incentive to buy the retail copies. I think this one was like a magic bag of some sort that allowed you to get more space for and limit all the weight that you had to worry about, maybe 100% weight reduction. Next up, we have The Gates of Discord, which was released February 10th, 2004. I remember this one being a little buggy, if I recall right. I think John Smedley, president of Sony Online Entertainment at the time, described it as one of the worst mistakes of games that they made in the last 5 years. So it definitely didn't turn out well and was very difficult to launch. You think games today are easy and launches go well. Think about these games back in the day. Like, launches were tough, and they still are today for obvious reasons. This is the one expansion that I don't remember hardly any of it. I'm looking back at different sites and things like that, trying to jog my memory, and I don't even know how I got through this expansion, to be honest. I must have been doing a lot of drugs or something like that during the time. I do remember, though, that there was, they introduced the Berserker class, which was a new character that you could play there. Again, never really got into that one too much. They did offer a new system called the Tribute, which you could then donate different tributes or something along those lines to be able to get different benefits and items, etc., etc. Next expansion, which was the Omens of War, the last expansion that I actually played, which released in September 14th, 2004. Again, so they were pumping out expansions pretty fast year after year. It was definitely a difficult expansion. They raised the level cap to 70. This is where they also introduced the epic weapons as Epic 2.0, not the original 1.0s. And I remember them being very difficult. We thought the first epics were hard. These ones were very difficult. There was a tribute system, a task system that allowed players to have quick solo content while waiting for groups to form, which was very nice. They added in a 9th spell slot, which is very cool, that you could earn by purchasing with your alternate advancement abilities. You know, again, as a caster, that was huge. They did also add in a voice macro system. I never used it because about that point in time, I think we had some sort of voice chats, if I recall. If not, none of us really were super experienced in using voice. We were so experienced at that point in time just typing things in and having different macros. So it didn't get used a lot, and it was probably pretty clunky, to be honest. The final zone in this game was called the Citadel of Anguish. Again, I think I left the guild and left the game entirely before I got to this point. I never did end up getting my Epic 2.0. This game just burnt me out at this point in time. I was completely exhausted, could not do it anymore. And if I recall, actually, this was about the time I went back into college, the second time at the University of Idaho. And at that point in time, EverQuest 2 came out shortly around that time. I started playing that, trying to give that an experience. And then, of course, the EverQuest killer, World of Warcraft, came out right around the same time as well. And once you got into World of Warcraft, we know what happens with that. Everybody started playing World of Warcraft and pretty much killed EverQuest. And I do miss those days. They were a lot of fun. I wish I would have stayed with EverQuest, honestly, during that time, and actually played more EverQuest 2. I've gone back and played some EverQuest 2 recently, last year, to just kind of get that experience again. I never really played much of it, to be honest. WoW took over all my time, and getting into WoW was kind of on the heels of EverQuest, right? So the raids in WoW were difficult, but having played EverQuest made me so much better player that the dungeons and the monsters and the raids and World of Warcraft were easy. They were hard, but they weren't nearly as hard as anything that we experienced back in those days in EverQuest. World of Warcraft took a lot of different ideas and things that worked well for their game from EverQuest. A lot of games in the future did, to be honest. EverQuest was a game that inspired millions of people and millions of different developers and artists going forward. There was a lot of great things that happened during this game, and of course, going forward, there's still many, many more expansions that came out. They're still making expansions today. I can't even believe that, to be honest. There are people that still play this game today. It is free to play if you want to play the regular expansions. If you want to play what they call TLP servers, which are like where they reintroduce the classic experience and you can play through the game from the original expansions, and they release an expansion like every month or two. You have to pay monthly for that, which a lot of people really enjoy those because people love to play the old classic stuff, just as I do. I have gone back and played the experience, the old expansions on some of those TLPs in the past. You play it about Canarch, Shadows or Scars of Elias, and everybody kind of burns out, especially around Planes of Power. Most of the people on those servers, everybody leaves and goes and starts a new TLP server. I don't know if that's quite designed the way it should be, marketing-wise. They probably could have done a better job of trying to figure out how do we keep players on particular servers. But nonetheless, that is what it is. I did play this game again a lot with a friend when I was in Korea, working as a teacher. Travis and him and I, we'd get together and we'd play some of the game at a point where we didn't know anything about the game. I mean, this was like 4 or 5 expansions, maybe even more than that, since both of us had stopped playing. So it was kind of fun to be able to play together. So we started all fresh new characters with all the different new experiences. The game is actually a lot easier now, to be honest. There's a lot of systems in place that help new characters. Leveling is not nearly as hard as what it used to be. You could, be level 50 in under a week, which was astronomically unheard of back in the day when you played original EverQuest. It took several months to be able to get level 50 back in the day. So that was a lot of fun. I have a lot of great memories playing with Travis. Travis, I know you're watching. I appreciate you, buddy. And anytime you want to play this game again, you let me know. I'll be there. There are boards out there that have memories of Azreality Mar. I've taken a picture here to show you what that looks like. It hasn't been active in many years, obviously, but it's nice to be able to go back and see all these different experiences of people from the server. A lot of great times were had. These were pivotal moments in my gaming life, I would say. I learned a lot about how to be a gamer and how to appreciate and enjoy and understand what it takes to coordinate with others to be able to take down big raid bosses and be a better player overall. Without EverQuest, I don't think I would be where I am today with regards to enjoying and appreciating games. A lot of great memories, and I wish we could go back to those times. I look back on with fondness that even though it burnt me out in the end, I wouldn't trade them any days that I was part of that. It has those good feelings in your chest. Just thinking back, I don't know how to explain nostalgia better than that. It just feels good, and I long to go back to those simpler days, to be honest. Being an adult sucks. You got to do adulting things like pay bills and work every day and earn a living and prep for retirement and pay your utility bills. Back in those days, didn't have to do that so much. It was more carefree. Well, there you have it. That's my memories of playing EverQuest as best that I can recall them. If you played EverQuest back in the day and have any interesting memories you want to share, please post them in the comments below. With that being said, of course, if you like this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe for more content like this. I do retro to modern day game reviews, retrospectives, things like that, and game hunting videos, of course, as well. Alright, with that being said then, be good to each other, keep on gaming, and I'll see you guys next time.